Imagine waking up one day, unsure if the argument from last night even happened. You remember the words, the shouting, the tears, but they insist none of it occurred. You check your phone, no proof. You replay the moment again and again. Still, something inside you whispers, maybe they're right, maybe I overreacted. And slowly, day by day, your trust in your own perception begins to fracture. This is not just a misunderstanding. This is not simply forgetfulness or a bad memory. This is psychological warfare, carefully designed to make you question the one thing no one else can control, your sense of reality. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. But if you are being gaslit, you might eventually believe you are. That is the horror. Not just being manipulated, but being persuaded to doubt yourself so deeply that you hand your truth over voluntarily. Gaslighting has become a cultural term, often thrown around casually, but its roots are chilling. The term comes from a 1944 film, Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane, dimming the lights and then denying the change. Her reality is rewritten, her voice silenced, her mind betrayed. But what if gaslighting is more than a cinematic metaphor? What if it is not rare at all, but quietly thriving around you, in your home, in your relationships, even in your workplace? What if you have already experienced it and called it something else? Modern psychology has documented this phenomenon extensively. Researchers like Dr. Robin Stern, author of The Gaslight Effect, warn that this is not a rare affliction of villains, but a behavioral strategy often employed by people who feel threatened by truth. It begins with small denials. You misunderstood me. That's not what I said. Then grows into accusations. You are too sensitive. You always twist things. And over time, it becomes a cycle of mental erosion. But here is the twist. The gaslighter may not even realize they are doing it. Some manipulators lie consciously. Others, more terrifyingly, believe their lies. Their version of truth becomes a tool, not just to escape guilt, but to gain control. So here is a question for you. Have you ever apologized for something you were never sure you even did? Have you ever second-guessed your memory so hard you felt like a stranger in your own skin? If so, you may have been pulled into the undertow of a force far more calculated than simple dishonesty, a force that does not need to shout or hit or punish to destroy. It only needs to plant doubt. And once doubt takes root, everything else becomes negotiable, even the truth. But there is a darker question, a more uncomfortable one. What if you are not just the victim of gaslighting? What if at times you are the one doing it? Because behind every case of psychological manipulation is not just a victim, but a person trying to rewrite reality. Sometimes for power, sometimes for fear, sometimes just to survive. Before we can understand how gaslighting works and how to free ourselves from its grip, we must first see its full shape, not just how it feels, but why it works, and more importantly, why it thrives in places where love, trust, or respect should be strongest. So do not go anywhere, because what you are about to learn may change the way you see your own past and your present forever. But to truly understand gaslighting, we must first expose the secret at its core. It is not built on lies, it is built on belief. And belief, unlike lies, is far harder to confront. Stay with me, because what comes next will not only explain how gaslighting works, it will reveal why it works. And that, my friend, is where the truth begins to crack. Imagine reality not as a solid floor beneath your feet, but as a mirror, one that reflects whatever light is cast upon it. In a healthy world, that light is truth, even if imperfect. But in a gaslit world, the light is controlled, filtered, manipulated, until the mirror reflects back something twisted, something that benefits someone else more than you. That is the premise of the dark psychology of gaslighting. It is not about lying once. It is about creating a world where your truth becomes negotiable. The gaslighter, whether a partner, a boss, or a parent, does not always begin with cruelty. Often, they begin with doubt. A single sentence, "That is not how it happened," and then they wait. You might protest at first. You might even be certain, but the seed has been planted. Psychologists like Dr. Elizabeth Loftus have studied memory for decades. Her groundbreaking work shows how memories are not static files. but malleable and vulnerable to suggestion. One distorted detail, especially when repeated, can change the entire memory. Gaslighters know this intuitively. They do not argue facts, they chip away at certainty. You begin to ask, did I really hear that? Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I am being sensitive. And here comes the most dangerous turn. As doubt grows, so does your need for clarity, and the gaslighter becomes your only source of it. That is the trap. When someone controls your reality, they control your identity. Over time, victims of gaslighting do not just question events, they question who they are. That slow erosion of the self leads to something psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the internal discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. You remember being hurt, but you are told you were not. You feel unloved, but they say they adore you. You cry and they smile as if nothing happened. To resolve the discomfort, your mind must choose, and more often than not, it chooses them, not because they are right, but because trusting yourself has become too painful. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. But what happens when someone else makes you into something, then convinces you did it yourself? That is the philosophical rot at the heart of gaslighting. It is a violation not just of emotional boundaries, but of epistemology, the very way you come to know the world. When knowledge is undermined, what remains? And the terrifying part, the gaslighter may not even feel like they are doing anything wrong. In fact, many gaslighters operate from deep insecurity. They reshape your reality, not out of malice, but because they are terrified of their own. They cannot admit wrongdoing, they cannot confront failure, so they edit your perception to preserve their fragile identity. This is the dark secret. Gaslighting is not always born from power, it is often born from fear. And fear, when fused with charm, intelligence, and emotional closeness, becomes a potent weapon. The victim is not just manipulated, they are made to feel grateful for the manipulation. They are drawn closer, even as they are erased. So here is the paradox. If someone loves you, but cannot see you clearly, is it love at all? This is where psychology meets philosophy, because the dark psychology of gaslighting is not just about lies, it is about erasure. It is not only what is said, it is what is never allowed to be real. And when reality is no longer mutual, relationship becomes control. But here is where you come in. If this is already resonating, if your heart feels that low thrum of recognition, pause, take a breath, and consider this. Maybe your doubt is not a weakness. Maybe it is a signal, one that someone else has been trying to silence. Before we move forward, I want to ask you something simple, but important. In the comments, share one moment, just one, where you began to question someone's version of the truth. No names, no drama, just your story. Because in this channel, your truth is not negotiable. And if you find yourself pulled into this conversation, I invite you to subscribe, not for me, but for the part of you that wants clarity, that wants healing, that wants to never doubt your own mind again. Because next we go deeper into the actual techniques, the psychology, and the silent methods used to reshape your sense of self, what they say, what they do not say, and why your memory is their favorite weapon. The worst kind of prison is the one you cannot see. It has no bars, no locks, and no guard, but you feel it closing in every time you try to think for yourself. That is how the dark psychology of gaslighting works, not through violence, not through rage, but through invisible architecture, a system of mental manipulation built brick by brick, using your own thoughts, your own fears, and your own memories. Let us look closer. Gaslighting starts with subtle disorientation. The gaslighter makes small contradictions. You are remembering it wrong. I never said that. Or the classic, you are just too sensitive. At first, it feels like miscommunication. You defend yourself. You explain. You try harder to be clear. But each time you do, you give up a little more power, because what you are actually doing is negotiating your reality. Psychologists have identified these stages in what is called cognitive restructuring. It is a common tool in therapy, but when weaponized, it becomes a method of control. The gaslighter slowly replaces your internal reference points with theirs. Eventually, you stop asking, "Did that happen?" and start asking, "What do they think happened?" This is not random. This is a strategy, one that uses emotional abuse cloaked in affection. One moment, they are dismissive. The next, they are tender. You cry, they embrace you. You panic, they calm you. And slowly, unpredictably, they become both the wound and the remedy. This creates a phenomenon psychologists call trauma bonding, an attachment formed through cycles of mistreatment and reward. You feel safest with the person who destabilizes you, and even if you want to leave, you hesitate. Because what if they are right? What if you really are the one who is unstable? This is where memory distortion becomes the perfect weapon. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a pioneer in memory research, demonstrated that human memory is astonishingly pliable. In one study, participants were convinced they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child, even when it never happened. Just through repetition and subtle suggestion, false memories were implanted. Now imagine that power in the hands of someone who wants to control you. The gaslighter does not need you to forget everything. They only need you to doubt enough to question your instincts, enough to give them the benefit of the doubt, enough to ask them what to believe. And once that happens, they become your compass, your mirror, your reality check. But what happens when your compass always points to their convenience? Philosophically, this leads to a haunting question. If someone else defines your truth, is it still yours? Or are you merely playing a role in their narrative? Gaslighters rarely yell. They do not need to. Their power is not volume, it is subtlety. They smirk when you cry. They question your sanity when you are angry. They act calm, rational, superior, and it works. Because in contrast, your emotion seems unstable. You begin to believe that they are the stable one. You become the unreliable narrator of your own life. Over time, you stop confronting. You stop arguing, not because you agree, but because you are too exhausted to question anymore. That silence, that collapse is the final victory of manipulation. And it does not always happen in romantic relationships. Sometimes it is your boss rewriting your mistakes. Sometimes it is a parent who insists your childhood was perfect. Sometimes it is society itself telling you to smile, stay quiet, stop being dramatic. The dark psychology of gaslighting is not always intimate. Sometimes it is cultural. So ask yourself, who in your life do you trust, but still feel nervous around? Who do you explain yourself to more than you should? Who makes you feel unsure without ever raising their voice? Because the most effective manipulation is not what they say. It is what you begin to say to yourself. And the paradox is this: if your mind can be manipulated, how do you know what is truly yours? Hold on to that question, because next we will explore what happens after your trust begins to collapse, not just in others, but in yourself. How doubt becomes a poison, how confusion becomes your norm, and why even intelligent, emotionally aware people fall into this trap. It is not because they are weak. It is because gaslighting is designed to bypass your strength and aim straight for your sense of identity. The most dangerous part of being gaslit is not the lies you are told. It is the moment you begin to lie to yourself. This is where the dark psychology of gaslighting tightens its grip, not just around your perception, but around your very sense of who you are. It is not about winning an argument. It is about creating so much confusion, so much psychological friction, that you stop trusting your thoughts entirely. It does not happen overnight. At first you protest. You say, "I remember it differently," but the other person is so calm, so certain, so unshaken. And maybe you were tired. Maybe you do misremember things sometimes. You are human, after all. But here is the pattern. Each time you challenge their version, they do not just disagree, they turn it back on you. You are being dramatic. You always do this. Why do you make things up? And that is when the real shift begins. You begin to wonder, am I the problem? This is cognitive dissonance at its peak, a psychological tension that arises when your internal truth clashes with external feedback. You remember feeling dismissed, but they say they were loving. You recall the cold tone, but they insist you are imagining it. You remember crying. They remember a normal conversation. Faced with this contradiction, your mind seeks peace. And the easiest way to resolve dissonance is not to fight harder. It is to fold, to agree, to doubt yourself. This is not weakness. This is survival. Because your nervous system does not crave truth, it craves safety. And when truth feels dangerous, your mind will sacrifice it to preserve emotional stability. That is why even intelligent, emotionally aware people fall into this trap. It is not because they are unaware, it is because they are empathetic. They give people the benefit of the doubt. They reflect, they examine themselves, and that very empathy becomes the lever used against them. Now let us get more personal. Have you ever caught yourself saying sorry without knowing why? Have you ever sat in silence after a conflict, replaying every moment, not because you were wrong, but because you needed to find a reason why they acted that way? That is the psychological trauma gaslighting leaves behind, a haunting need to explain, to rationalize, to blame yourself, just to make sense of the chaos. Over time, self-doubt becomes the default. You begin to delay your reactions, second-guess your tone, hesitate to ask questions. You may even stop trusting your memory. You edit your thoughts before speaking. You walk on eggshells, not because you are afraid of conflict, but because you no longer trust your own instincts. And that is control. Not the kind that uses force or commands, but the kind that quietly rewires your internal compass until it always points to them. And here is the cruelest irony. The more you try to be better, kinder, calmer, more understanding, the deeper you sink, because no amount of emotional intelligence can fix manipulation disguised as love. The dark psychology of gaslighting feeds off your willingness to grow. It uses your strengths as vulnerabilities. Your compassion becomes compliance. Your awareness becomes paralysis. Your self-reflection becomes self-erasure. So here is a hard question. If you are constantly adjusting yourself to keep someone else comfortable, who are you becoming? And a deeper one still. If your peace requires you to be silent about your pain, is it really peace? You deserve to ask these questions, not because you are broken, but because you are healing. Doubt is not your enemy, it is your beginning. Because the moment you start to question the doubt, that is when your truth begins to resurface. But we are not there yet. Before you can escape the web, you need to understand just how wide it is. Because gaslighting does not only live in romantic relationships, it appears in boardrooms, family dinners, classrooms, even entire institutions. Next, we are going to expose its presence in the everyday world, how gaslighting shows up where we least expect it, and more importantly, how we often mistake it for normal. You might think gaslighting only happens between two people, an abusive partner and a victim, or a controlling parent and a confused child, but that is only the beginning. The dark psychology of gaslighting stretches far beyond the private sphere. It seeps into relationships at every level, social, professional, and even cultural. It appears anywhere there is a power imbalance and a desire to avoid responsibility. In toxic relationships, gaslighting often hides beneath love. The gaslighter says they are doing it for your own good. They say you are too emotional, or no one else would tolerate you. These phrases do not sound like abuse on the surface, but over time they erode your sense of worth until love and harm become indistinguishable. In families, it might be a parent rewriting your childhood. You were never mistreated. You had a great life. You remember neglect. They remember generosity. And every time you try to speak your truth, you are silenced, not with violence, but with denial, a weapon that cuts without ever raising its voice. Now imagine this same dynamic in the workplace. A boss makes a mistake, but blames you. You raise a concern and are told, you are reading too much into it. You express discomfort, and suddenly, you are the problem. Corporate gaslighting is subtle, strategic, and efficient. It makes you question your professionalism, your value, your sanity, and because your livelihood is at stake, you often stay silent, replaying the events in your mind, wondering, maybe I misunderstood. But here is where it gets even more unsettling. Gaslighting does not stop at personal or professional levels. It operates on a societal scale. Entire systems can gaslight their people. Cultures can rewrite history. Media can manipulate narratives. Governments can deny atrocities. And all the while, citizens are left disoriented, overwhelmed, unsure of what to believe. We are told to move on from injustice that was never resolved. We are taught sanitized versions of reality, dressed in patriotism, tradition, or efficiency. The result? A collective illusion of truth. Take Plato's allegory of the cave, a philosophical metaphor that eerily resembles cultural gaslighting. Prisoners, chained inside a cave since birth, watch shadows on the wall and believe those shadows are real. They never see the fire behind them. They never question the source of what they perceive. And when one prisoner escapes and returns to tell the others the truth, they do not believe him. In fact, they hate him for it. This is the paradox. Sometimes people would rather protect the illusion than face the truth. Because truth is not only disruptive, it is dangerous, it forces change, and systems built on false realities will do anything to maintain control. So ask yourself this: have you ever been in a relationship, a job, or even a culture where speaking truth was treated like betrayal? Have you ever felt more pressure to be agreeable than to be honest? If so, you have seen gaslighting at work, not as a personal flaw, but as a collective design. And the damage is deeper than confusion. It is alienation. When you cannot trust what you see, or what you feel, or even what you remember, where do you go? You become isolated, silent, separated, not just from others, but from yourself. And yet, here is the strangest irony. In a world full of false narratives, sometimes it is the most doubtful person who is closest to the truth, because the one who doubts, who questions, who resists, has not surrendered their mind. And that is where your power lies. So, what now? How do you escape a trap that is built to feel like home? How do you break free from a belief system that lives inside your mind? It starts with awareness, but it grows through a moment of painful clarity. Because once you recognize the illusion, you cannot unsee it. And in the next part, we are going there. We will uncover the moment when victims of gaslighting wake up, the flicker of light in the darkness, the memory that cannot be erased, the gut feeling that defies logic. The truth you will find is not always a flood. Sometimes it is a whisper you finally decide to hear. It often begins with something small, a word, a look, a contradiction you can no longer ignore. And suddenly, something stirs inside you, a tremor, a quiet voice, a memory that returns not as a blur, but with clarity. This is the moment gaslighting starts to lose its grip. The moment your mind, long buried beneath contradictions and control, begins to wake up. But awakening from the dark psychology of gaslighting is not cinematic. It is not a single heroic act. It is messy. It is terrifying. It is disorienting. Because the reality you are waking up to might be worse than the illusion you were living in. Still, something in you insists, this is not right. I know what I felt. I remember what happened. You begin to notice patterns, the repeated denials, the selective memory, the guilt flipped back onto you. It no longer feels like coincidence. It feels like a script. Psychologists call this the snap moment, a break in the cognitive dissonance. The illusion fractures, and even though the fear remains, your self-trust begins to pulse beneath it, asking to be heard. But here is what makes this moment so fragile. As soon as you begin to believe yourself again, the gaslighter responds. They intensify the charm, or the guilt, or the threats, anything to pull you back into the fog. You are told you are overthinking, you are ruining everything, you are making things up again. And now, you are caught between two selves, the one who doubts and the one who knows. This internal conflict is not weakness, it is the awakening. It is the beginning of your resistance. It is where healing begins. And often it begins not with facts but with feelings, a gut instinct, a strange anger, a sadness that will not go away, a voice inside that says, I should not feel like this. Do not ignore it. That voice is you, the part of you that has been waiting for permission to speak again. So right now, pause. Think of a time when you felt the fog lift, even briefly. A moment when someone's words felt scripted, when the apology felt empty, when your body told you something your mind was not ready to admit. Hold on to that moment. If you feel ready, write it down in the comments. You do not have to name anyone. You do not have to tell your whole story. Just describe the moment you began to question the version of truth you were given. Because speaking it, even quietly, disrupts the silence that gaslighting feeds on. And here is something else to hold on to. Waking up does not mean you have all the answers. It means you are willing to start asking the right question. Questions like, why do I feel exhausted after every interaction with this person? Why do I keep explaining myself over and over? Why do I feel guilt when I stand up for my feelings? These are not petty doubts. These are clues. Clues that your inner compass is starting to work again. And once it does, the illusion can no longer contain you. But there is a warning. After the awakening comes the grief, because realizing you were manipulated, betrayed, or controlled, it hurts. It makes you question everything, including yourself. But here is the paradox. The deeper your pain, the clearer your truth. Because you cannot grieve something you did not truly feel. And that means your memories, your emotions, your instincts, they were real all along. So do not rush through this stage. Let the grief speak. Let the anger rise. Let the confusion settle. This is not the end. This is your return to your mind, to your voice, to yourself. But as you come back, you may ask one more question. Why did they do it? What could make someone so determined to control your reality? The answer is not what you think. It is not just about power or cruelty. It goes deeper into fear, shame, and the part of the gaslighter that they refuse to see in themselves. And in the next part, we will look into that darkness. We will uncover the hidden pain behind the manipulation, the truth behind why they gaslight at all. It will not excuse what they have done, but it might finally make it make sense. People often ask, why would someone gaslight the person they love? The answer is unsettling. Not all gaslighters are monsters. Some are wounded children in adult bodies, terrified of their own reflection. The dark psychology of gaslighting is not only about domination, it is about avoidance, a desperate, unconscious refusal to face inner pain. Gaslighters often operate from a place of deep, unspoken shame. They cannot tolerate the idea of being wrong, flawed, or weak. So they project those traits onto you. You become the liar, the unstable one, the overreactor, because they cannot bear the thought that it might be them. This is where psychology meets philosophy. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, the part of us we repress, deny, and bury. But what we deny does not disappear. It emerges, distorted and weaponized. Gaslighting, in its purest form, is a war against the shadow, but instead of fighting it internally, the gaslighter externalizes it. They force you to carry it for them. This is narcissistic abuse at its core, not just inflated self-love, but fragile self-worth protected by control, distortion, and emotional erosion. The gaslighter is not strong, they are brittle, and you, because you reflect something real, become a threat. They need you to doubt yourself so they can feel safe within themselves. And if you begin to trust your truth, speak your mind, or hold them accountable, they will do anything to drag you back into silence. Because your awareness threatens their illusion. But let us pause here, because now, we shift the lens from them back to you. You have been through the spiral, the doubt, the awakening, and now you stand on the edge of understanding. What does this truth change for you? That the person who hurt you might be terrified of their own guilt. That the one who manipulated you might be doing so to protect a version of themselves they cannot let die. Write it down, reflect, in the comments share, if you feel safe, what it feels like to realize that their control was never about you, it was about them. This realization will not heal you instantly, but it will give you distance, clarity, the power to say, I did not deserve this, and I will no longer carry someone else's shame. Because the dark psychology of gaslighting is not just a story of abuse, it is a story of transference, of one person's inability to carry their truth, passed to another as a burden. But now you know. And with that knowledge comes responsibility, not to fix them, but to free yourself. There will be a temptation to stay, to hope they change, to think now that I understand, maybe I can help them. But remember this, empathy should not cost you your reality. And here is the final paradox. Sometimes, the most compassionate act is to walk away from someone who refuses to see themselves. Because you cannot hold on to truth with one hand and illusion with the other. You must choose. And in choosing, You reclaim your clarity, your peace, your mind. But even as you reclaim it, the question lingers. Can you ever fully trust your truth again? That is where we go next. We return to the beginning, not to the gaslighter, but to you, to explore what it means to rebuild, to question again, to believe again, and to hold the light of truth. Even when the world insists on shadows, you are still here, which means something inside you refused to stay silent. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was pain, perhaps it was a quiet longing to know. Was it really gaslighting, or was it just me? That question haunts survivors, because even after the fog clears, the silence echoes, and the doubt, though quieter, still whispers. So let us return to the beginning. We opened this journey with a question: what happens when your reality is no longer your own? Now we ask a deeper one: can you ever fully trust your reality again? The dark psychology of gaslighting leaves scars not just on your past, but on your perception of the present. You begin to second-guess even healthy interactions. When someone validates you, you wait for the twist. When you feel happy, you wonder if it is a setup. You trust with your foot on the brake. This is normal, because healing does not mean going back to who you were. It means becoming someone new, someone who knows how fragile truth can be, and yet still chooses to believe in it. Here is what you must understand. Truth is not perfect. It shifts, it grows, it is shaped by memory, mood, and meaning. But that does not make it invalid, it makes it yours. And reclaiming your truth does not mean being certain of everything. It means being allowed to feel, to remember, to question, to know what you know without explanation, without apology. You may never find an answer that silences every doubt. That is not the goal. The goal is to learn to live with uncertainty and still trust yourself. Philosophers have long wrestled with the nature of truth. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But what happens when your thoughts have been twisted by another, when your very thinking becomes suspect? Then, truth must become something deeper than fact. It must become presence. The act of standing in your own awareness and saying, "This is how I felt, this is what I saw, and that is enough." Because in a world where gaslighting thrives, the radical act is not proving you are right. It is believing you have the right to know what is real for you. So now, the power returns to you. You are no longer defined by what they said, what they denied, or what they claimed you made up. You are not a reflection of someone else's fear. You are not the echo of someone else's narrative. You are you. Still healing, still learning, still building a reality that reflects not their story, but yours. And maybe you are still afraid. Maybe you still hear that voice in your head questioning everything. That is okay. But from this moment on, let that voice be yours, not theirs. Let it ask questions that lead to awareness. Let it challenge what does not feel right. Let it become your compass again. Because the truth was never lost. It was just waiting for you to come back to it. And if this video helped you find even a piece of that truth, then stay. Subscribe, not because you owe me anything, but because this is the kind of space where we unravel illusions, where we speak what was once silenced, and where we awaken together. Share this video with someone who needs to know they are not crazy, that their memories matter, that their feelings are valid, that their confusion has a name. Because sometimes a video like this is the beginning of a psychological awakening. And if you made it to the end, that means you are already on the path. So keep walking, keep questioning, and above all, keep trusting that small voice inside you. It does not lie. It is just waiting to be heard again.